I'm wild again, beguiled again, a simpering, whimpering child again, bewitched, bothered and bewildered am I. Couldn't sleep and wouldn't sleep when love came and told me I shouldn't sleep, bewitched, bothered and bewildered am I. Lost my heart, but what of it? He is cold, I agree. He can laugh, but I love it, although the laugh's on me. I'll sing to him, each spring to him, and worship the trousers that cling to him. Bewitched, bothered and bewildered am I.
Hello everyone, that is Bewitched, Bothered and Bewildered, sung by Posner as a declaration of love and lust to Dakin in The History Boys. In the previous video, I tell you to go away and have a look at that, but I've gone to the trouble of including it here because it acts as this neat segue, this movement from one space to another space, and we are now in Hector's classroom. In the previous scene, the boys are discussing sex, with Dakin using the extended metaphor of war to compare it to his desire to have sex with the headmaster's secretary, Fiona. As we move into the next scene, we can see how Hector says poetry of a more traditional sort. And the boys then go on to discuss what poems are and what they're for. Tim says at the top here, he doesn't understand poetry. And Hector tells him that poetry is an antidote. It's a cure. It's if you've got a headache, it's a remedy to grief, and it makes you feel better. So unlike in Irwin's classroom, as was seen in the previous scene, where knowledge is used and manipulated to pass tests and to sound clever, Hector teaches pointless knowledge, the otios, knowledge which serves no practical purpose, poetry, so that they can learn about what it means to be alive, so that they can learn about the human condition. Hector's classroom is one proliferated, meaning full of nonsense. They learn this nonsense for a reason. And as we move on to the next page, we see this with the reference to silly time. Now, some silly time. Where's the kitty? And we'll see here how the boys, they perform this skit. They perform a scene from a film. The silly time being that Hector's job in this moment is to identify the film that they have chosen. When we watch this on the stage, some of the humour comes from the fact that, again, these boys are doing something they're not supposed to do. So in the French scene, we saw Dakin without his trousers on and the headmaster walks in. Here, the boys, they start smoking cigarettes in the classroom. They're allowed to because that's what happens in the film. Hector guesses the film perfectly. He says, could it be Paul Henreid and Bette Davis in Now Voyager? And they're like, oh, sir, you got it. Oh. He says, it's famous, you ignorant little tarts. And what we have here is an interesting thing occurring. because the boys, Posner, firstly, he sings Bewitched, Bothered and Bewildered, sort of a 1950s song. And then the boys, they put on their little skit, their performance of Now Voyager, sort of a 1950s film. So we see that these boys learn nonsense, but they are learning the nonsense of Hector's youth. They're learning the nonsense of their teacher, not the nonsense of the 1980s, the time at which the play is set. It's the frippery, the piff, the pish and the piffle, I should say, the nonsense of what their teacher likes. So for me, as a child of the sort of 90s, I was a teenager in the 90s and early noughties, this is like the equivalent of me getting you to know about things like The Matrix or Father Ted or I don't know, whatever else it was that I liked at the time. When what you should be learning about is whatever the kind of current popular culture is. And I don't claim to know too much about that. You'll be pleased to know. Now, as we move on, this scene kind of moves into lots of other scenes. We move from Posner to discussion of poetry to Now Voyager, and Rudge is left working. And this is significant because we were told by the headmaster earlier on that Rudge is the oddity. He's an oddity. You know, he might get into Loughborough on a good year. The oddity being that he's supposedly less intelligent or less intellectually capable than the other boys. But he works hard. And he now engages in a conversation with Mrs Lintott. And I will read this bit. Ah, Rudge, miss. How are you getting on with Mr Irwin? It's interesting, miss, if you know what I mean. It makes me grateful for your lessons. Really? Well, that's nice to hear. Firm foundations type thing. Point A, point B, point C. Mr Irwin is more free range. And you can see here that the annotations on the side tell you. Rudge likes Mrs Lintott's lessons because they're methodical, they're formulaic, and he's able to learn something. He wants to know what he has to do to succeed. And Mr Irwin's free range, sort of like a chicken running around doing what it wants to do, method of teaching is sort of lost on him. This metaphor is continued. Hadn't thought of you as a battery chicken, Rudge. It's only a metaphor. He continued, you force-fed us the facts. Now we're in the process of running around acquiring flavour. Is that what Mr Irwin says? No, the metaphor's mine. But the metaphor that he uses is arguably what the teachers feel. Mrs Lintott has given them the knowledge to enable them to apply to Oxford and Cambridge in the first place, but that's not enough. They need flavour. They need garnish. They need an umbrella in the cocktail, a bit of parsley on a meal. It doesn't really add anything, but it's eye-catching. He explains this with the reference to Carry On films. He says, like, I'm just going home now to watch some videos of the Carry On films. I don't understand why there are none in the school library. Should there be? Well, Mr Irwin said Carry Ons would be good films to talk about. Really? How peculiar. Does he like them, do you think? Probably not, miss. Never know with him. Mrs Lintott says, I'm wondering now if there's something that I've missed. The point is that she hasn't missed anything. Mr Rudge Irwin says, sorry, let's start that again. Rudge continues. Mr Irwin says, while they have no intrinsic artistic merit, they achieve some of the permanence of art simply by persisting and acquire an incremental significance if only as social history. Rudge reads from his notes because otherwise he doesn't understand it. Rudge reads from his notes because he values that type of teaching where somebody tells you what it is you need to know. To be clear, a carry-on film has very little to do with history. Irwin says that they should go and watch the carry-on films because it might give them some sort of new, profound, unique, strange insight into history that will make them stand out. And as this particular scene finishes, Rudge acknowledges that Mr. Irwin is almost deliberately controversial, because being controversial is memorable. We see this in the modern world. Think about the average person who has a sort of newspaper column. Think about the people you hear on radios quite regularly. They're, in some respects, renter gobs. They are employed to get people listening, to get people talking. So it's almost a case of the more outrageous you are, the better, because then at least that gets people discussing something that otherwise they're not going to discuss. It's memorable. So Rudge continues. Mr. Irwin says that if Orwell were alive today, he'd be in the National Front. Dear me, what fun you must all have. Rudge, kind of mockingly, tongue in cheek, says, it's cutting edge, miss. It really is. Therefore, the point with this scene is that Rudge wants to be successful. And so he does what Mr. Irwin says, because he wants to get into Oxford and Cambridge. At the same time as acknowledging that it's not really something he understands very much. He doesn't appear to have a great amount of respect for Irwin's philosophy and Irwin's methodology. Mrs. Lintott certainly has very little respect for it. She is the teacher, marginalised throughout much of the text, who has got the boys to this position of being able to apply to these grand universities. But now she has got them to that stage. Look what happens. Two male teachers swoop in to sort of claim the glory. One of whom teaches poetry for poetry's sake and has them smoking, doing French, singing songs in lesson for the hell of it, and another one who encourages them to say the most controversial thing that they possibly can so that they catch the attention of the examiner and are memorable. We can see the flaws with both Hector and Irwin's teaching philosophies. Perhaps we shouldn't overlook, however, the point that Mrs. Lintott is maybe marginalised for a reason. Maybe knowing the facts isn't enough. But if that's true, that's a rather damning it's an indictment. It's a damning indictment of the modern education system, that having knowledge and knowing it is not considered enough. It's insufficient. That's it for this particular video. Future ones will continue working through the plot and recapping and reviewing things. I hope you're finding it incredibly useful. And if nothing else, you had a nice song at the beginning. That's it for now. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.